The president says a Navy destroyer intercepted that sanctioned Iranian cargo ship trying to get through the U.S. blockade in the Gulf of Oman, just east of the Strait of Hormuz. He says that vessel is now in Marine custody with a hole blown in its engine room. Meanwhile, Tehran reportedly is refusing to negotiate with the U.S. in Pakistan. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palkot is live from Tel Aviv with the latest. Greg.
John, there are new questions about those planned upcoming talks between the United States and Iran as the U.S. and Iran face off in the Gulf. The U.S. Navy is enforcing a blockade around the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump just recently has said a naval ship intercepted an Iranian vessel that tried to get past the quarantine, refused to stop, forcing the U.S. to target this ship. And for the first time during this operation, U.S. service members went on board. He said in a post, in part, our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engine room. Right now, U.S. Marines have custody of the vessel. That's very crucial. U.S. service members on an Iranian ship. All this comes as talks are planned for Islamabad starting Tuesday between the U.S. and Iran, just ahead of the current ceasefire running out midweek. Now we're hearing from Iran as well, referencing the U.S. naval blockade and the rhetoric coming from the White House, indicating they might not even take part in the talks, or at least they still haven't decided. One state news agency blaming, I'm quoting here, Washington's excessive demands, unrealistic expectations, constant shifts in stance, repeated contradictions, and the ongoing naval blockade, which it considers a breach of the ceasefire. John, we are waiting on a final move from both sides to see if this is just a last-minute posturing and some skirmishing or a real breakdown in the diplomatic path. We will see in the coming hours and days. Back to you.
The constant shifts in stance, that's unusual. The White House, it seems, at least from the talking points that have been released on the U.S. side of things, they've been pretty consistent about what they want from Iran.
Very consistent, yes. I mean, key points. And I think we still have to keep going back to the central issue that's at the heart of this, and that's the suspect nuclear program of Iran. The U.S. is demanding that the highly enriched uranium that Iran has be shipped out of the country. The enrichment process ends, and any thought of Iran building a nuclear weapon leaves their minds. Iran, a bit more circumspect on various fronts, saying again today it is their right to have a nuclear program. There is a big gap between the U.S. and Iran right now. Prospects of a deal, especially with this latest skirmishing on the high seas, looks more and more dim. Back to you.
All right, Greg Palkot, our senior foreign affairs correspondent. Greg, thanks. So there's growing pressure now on Iran on both the diplomatic and military tracks. The White House says its negotiating team, I should say, is preparing to head to Islamabad with the ceasefire deadline fast approaching. President Trump is warning Iran to take the deal or else. Alex Hogan is at the White House with the latest. Alex.
Hi, John. So, yes, we are monitoring these latest developments and what had been a standstill in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, major escalation with President Trump posting on Truth Social that this Iranian cargo ship tried to get past the U.S. naval blockade. And this is, again, part of what he wrote. The U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer USS Spruance intercepted the Tuska, which is that Iranian cargo ship, in the Gulf of Oman and gave them fair warning to stop. The Iranian crew refused to listen, so our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in their engine room. The president went on to say that the U.S. has the ship in custody and they are currently examining what is on board. And it comes after days of back and forth in the Strait. The White House has accused Iran of violating the ceasefire by opening fire on vessels yesterday. And Iran argues that the U.S. is violating the deal with its naval blockade. So more talks are expected to take place. Despite some back and forth this morning, the White House tells Fox that Vice President J.D. Vance will lead the U.S. delegation in Pakistan, and they will have about 1 day to negotiate a new deal before the current temporary ceasefire expires. Vice President J.D. Vance will be joined by envoys like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and the U.S. team is expected to leave tomorrow. It comes after earlier today, President Trump posted this to Iran on social media saying we are offering a very fair and reasonable deal, and I hope that they take it, because if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran. That's similar language to some of the comments that we heard from the president last weekend, comments that are already getting criticism from Democrats today who are arguing that this is escalatory and simply unhelpful.
We've lost our entire moral credibility. We have a president of the United States threatening to wipe out Iranian civilization, and people think it's normal. And then you have a situation where our troops are at risk, where a president who campaigned on peace is spending now $400 billion to spend more money on these wars.
Republicans today arguing that these measures and that the language is necessary to put enough pressure on Iran, especially ahead of potential talks that could take place in the coming days. Because, again, John, we know that this very delicate ceasefire is only supposed to last until Wednesday. John.
All right, Alex Hogan. Alex, thanks. For more on this, let's bring in Behnam Taleblu, Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and Ilan Berman, American Foreign Policy Council Senior Vice President. Thanks, both of you, for being with us today. Ilan, Iran is complaining that the blockade was somehow illegal, and yet Iran also shut down the Strait of Hormuz. That's also illegal. Where do we go from here?
Right. Well, I think the thing that we have to say first and foremost is that the commentary about the blockade that you hear from the administration's critics, that it's a desperation play, that it's sort of a 11th hour strategy, is totally false. I have, and I'm sure Behnam has as well, been in a lot of meetings with U.S. military planners, and this has been talked about for a long time. In fact, the blockade was always where we were going to end up, because the idea here is to take the tool that Iran thinks is its most potent weapon against the West and to flip the script, to turn it on the Iranian regime. Now, this is very high stakes because we're entering into the negotiations, the second round, which are going to happen despite what the Iranian regime says. But the clock is ticking in a number of ways. It's ticking on the ceasefire, which ends later this week, but it's also ticking in very real terms in terms of the Iranian economy, because with the blockade enforced, Iran is not able to outship its oil. Its stores of oil inside the country are getting full, and pumping is going to stop. And it's over the next couple of weeks, if the blockade continues, it's going to cause irreparable damage to Iran's oil industry. So the Iranians are very much feeling the heat here.
But the president is also feeling some heat, Behnam. After 60 days, he has to get authorization from Congress, right? And if Congress is not in a mood to spend more money, are the Iranians playing sort of rope-a-dope here, trying to stretch things out and hoping that the Congress will not authorize further military action?
Well, I think that Congress is one thing, but the Iranian waiting game or strategy is fundamentally another. I mean, the Islamic Republic isn't timing this based on Congress per se. I don't think it knows the difference between AUMF and the War Powers Resolution, which, by the way, I'm not a lawyer. Good friend Ilan is, but this might irritate some folks. I actually think the War Powers Act is unconstitutional. More on that later. CC the Nixon administration. But to that end, I think the Islamic Republic is trying to run the clock on one thing, and that's President Trump's term in office. And they will do anything, lie, cheat, fib, and steal, to make sure that the president, which imposed maximum pressure against it, which took out its top general in term one, and was now not once but twice willing to pull the trigger against this regime's nuclear program and missile and military apparatus in term two, to make sure that that person is not in office. So that is fundamentally the clock that Tehran is racing against. And that's when I think if they they can, slow roll the president, both, negotiations that collapsed and led to strikes last summer and negotiations that collapsed and led to strikes just this February, March, will prove the Islamic Republic wrong.
Ilan, Democrat Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia was on Fox News Sunday with Shannon Bream earlier and was pointing to the Obama administration and saying that the Iranians, when they signed the JCPOA, agreed not to pursue nuclear weapons. And he pointed to that as a reason that this war was unnecessary, essentially. How do you answer that?
So, quite frankly, with all due respect to the senator, I think that's disingenuous framing, because even President Obama himself articulated that the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that his administration birthed and shepherded over the political finish line, was never intended as a permanent solution to Iran's nuclear will to power. It was intended to slow down Iranian processes and create enough time to let the better angels of Iran's nature kick in. But what we saw during the decade that the JCPOA was in force was that exactly the opposite was happening. That Iran may have made incremental slowdown in its nuclear processes, but it was still, in the aggregate, increasing the threat that it posed to the region, the threat that it posed to the United States and to American allies. And it was doing so with a tremendous amount of additional cash, because the JCPOA, let's not forget, created this massive infusion of capital in terms of near-term and medium-term sanctions relief that really allowed the Iranian economy, which was in dire straits on the eve of the JCPOA being signed, really to reassert itself. And it put the regime in a much more stable place where it could fund these programs. It could fund its terror proxies. So I think it's a mistake to equate the illusory stability of the JCPOA period. I think it was anything but.
Let's talk a little bit about the effect of this war on Russia. For the near term, it would seem that Russia is actually doing better because oil prices are up. And we have a graphic that talks about that. But I want to ask both of you, what do you think is on the other side for Russia once this war ends? Behnam, let's start with you first.
Sure. So I would say fundamentally, up until even the blockade came in against the Islamic Republic, just like Russia, benefited from the fact that there was a short-term waiver. I mean, that's fundamentally the way the president got around the oil issue, which hasn't gone that far past $100 a barrel, because there has been significant supply, and that has offset some of the demand. So at most, you had a few brief price spikes. Sure, the Europeans are not happy with that, but I'd love to see the Europeans put their money where their mouth is when it comes to really doubling down against the Russians in Ukraine, so America can do more with less elsewhere, in particular the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. And fundamentally here, we have to zoom out. If you look at the biggest state threats to America, American interests, and American power in the 21st century, it is Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is the only non-nuclear member of that axis. So if the Trump administration does meaningful damage to the Islamic Republic of Iran, it actually kicks out the legs from underneath that anti-American authoritarian constellation.
Is there, Ilan, the possibility that the Iranian government falls? I mean, after 30,000, maybe 50,000 people were killed in protests against their own government, is there the possibility that a new government can rise there?
Well, look, I think this is really the $64,000 question. And I think we're short of the total, complete regime change that the president talks about in his truths, in his public messaging. But it is very clear that he's correct on one score, because the crop of leaders that he's dealing with, and Vice President Vance and the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are dealing with, are fundamentally different. They have a fundamentally different calculus than the regime did before, even though there is a largely incapacitated supreme leader who's nominally in charge. But the thing that I would point to here, and this is why this is an ongoing conversation, is that the very reason why I did and Behnam did and my colleagues and Behnam's colleagues have been so adamant about Iran for a long time being in this state of ferment is because the underlying fundamentals of the Iranian regime, the mass secularization that's happening in the theocratic regime, the economic underperformance, the misallocation of resources, all the things that brought the Iranians out to the streets in the first place, those are not going away. Those grievances are not going away. And they're going to have to be dealt with by the new partially reconstituted regime. So I think this is one to watch. And I think the question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we best help the Iranian people? Because the long game in this conversation isn't about the people that we're going to be talking to tomorrow and Tuesday in Islamabad. It's going to be about the people who inherit the country.
Exactly. Ilan Berman and Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.